Alrighty, so today I've got a deep dive for you on how to kickstart your jump to Lightspeed testing. I'm going to be covering a lot of things. Much of it is going to involve breaking down the current archetypes that I think are the most important things to be considering in your testing for the next set. We'll be looking at new additions for these potential archetypes. I'll be covering kind of all the tension points that can be presented basically with all the good decks that exist, and then some that might pop up with new cards and new leaders. Towards the end of this video, I will also break down some of the new leaders and new strategies and have some card callouts as well. Before we get going, please hit that subscribe button. Helps out a lot. And if you're interested in some more content from me, including some spoiler season testing, do check out my Patreon as well. All right, so table of contents. Number one, I kind of mentioned it, format pillars. Like, what are the established archetypes that are going to be good or potentially be good, and what problems do they present in current testing, and what are the things you need to look out for? And then I will also cover how these archetypes might be improving with jump to Lightspeed. I'll go do a full recap of all the tension points. Like, these are basically things I consider that are like problems that decks present that you must account for in your own deck building. They are, quote unquote, the limiting interactions that are presented in the game. And then I'll have a bit of a breakdown on how to kickstart your actual testing, some recommendations and how to begin that process. And finally, we will look at jump to Lightspeed leaders and some card callouts as well. A lot of that I will be doing throughout the rest of the spoiler season and through the release of the set, but we're going to start it off here. And just a little bit of a disclaimer, this is all assuming we do not get any bans or suspensions for current cards or leaders. I do not know if we will. So far, especially with how we're nearing the end of spoiler season, we're getting most of the cards to jump to Lightspeed. I'd like to begin testing, assuming that we're not getting any changes, and if we do, we'll adapt from there. All right, let's kick it off with Han Solo. So this is format pillar number one, and in my opinion, this is not going away. In fact, it is potentially getting better, and this presents many difficult things that you have to account for when building a deck. This is kind of the first thing I start to think about, and number one is DJ. Can your deck beat this card? Han can play this on turn 4. Not with tech, just with his leader flip, right? He can do it turn 3 if he goes turn 2 tech, right? So these are all tension points. Things like, can you beat that? If not, your deck is not a deck, really, right? Like, we are talking about hyper competitive tournament play. If you can't interact with this Han interaction, it's not going to work. So past DJ, Millennium Falcon. Now, this one might be even a bigger deal than DJ with the onset of a space-dominated set. If your entire strategy hinges on you being able to stick a turn 1 space unit, you have to rethink that, because Millennium Falcon in a Han deck can come out on turn 1 and kill your space unit, kills basically any turn 1 space unit, and you need to account for that. Are there ways to maneuver that? Well, certainly if you can play to the ground instead, that might be important. There are free pilots, like R2 is a free pilot, so potentially you can buffet your turn 1 play outside of Falcon range. Wedge, of course, can turn all the 1-cost pilots into free pilots. So there are some things you can say, okay, I've got this covered in some way, but pilots are upgrades, and what do those suffer against? It's waylay or other bounce effects. Han has built-in hate for this kind of upgrade heavy strategy. So it has built-in anti-space with basically the best potential turn 1 space unit in the game, which is Millennium Falcon, and it has built-in answers to playing upgrades on units between Waylay and Cunning, Cantina Bouncer, and Clear the Field, or whatever other bounce, right? This is a yellow effect, right? This deck can also play something like Bamboozle, which also removes these upgrades temporarily, or if it's a pilot leader, Bamboozle is actually a 0-cost way to kill a pilot leader. Crazy, right? So we've got a space dominated set, but this Han already has built-in safeguards against that. Not to mention DJ, who's on the ground, and like Tech DJ or just DJ on turn 4 with Han, all that stuff is very good when your opponent's only in space. They can't really interact with it very well. It's why Jango, the dominant space deck in the current format, actually usually plays to the ground early, because otherwise it's very much at risk of getting combo. Jango notably also has things like Daring Raid plus Target Count to kill 5 health units, and has other ways to interact with that combo. Or not combo. I barely even consider it a combo. It's just DJ with the Han leader. But certainly all of this stuff together, and this is not including anything new, these are just built-in powerhouses of the Han archetype. And when you are testing now, I do recommend you consider all of these tension points when thinking about the Han deck. And now, real brief, will it improve? So potentially, I think there's some cards that are definitely worth considering, like the new Han Solo Legendary works well with the Millennium Falcon or any other space units, and just gives it a decent ground ambusher, which is something didn't really have too much of past like Plo Koon and like the 7-drop Han. Mandalorian in the double yellow deck, I think this card is kind of crazy. It's kind of like Cunning on a 5/6 body with the pilot upside. I think you can also play like the new Millennium Falcon to have a little more space presence, although I don't know if that's necessary. The Han deck might actually want to not try to like beat people in space when everyone's playing space heavy decks. It might just prefer to stay on the ground. I think if you're going into a green Han deck, Blue Leader does a very similar thing to what the OG Millennium Falcon does, which it basically you can kill any turn 1 space unit your opponent plays. So you'd actually have 6 potential units that can do it. And then Chewbacca, which I will talk a little bit more on later, because I think it's probably even more well suited into like red-green hero aggro, but it's certainly kind of a bonkers card in general and could elevate this archetype. All right, next pillar is Jango. This deck I think will probably improve even more than Han. This one is truly scary with some of the new cards, but some tension points. Ping Tarkin Town. So this is the premier Ping Tarkin Town deck. There are others like Quinlan and Cad Bane, but Jango is just the best of those decks. He doesn't even have a pinging leader, but he plays a lot of units that do it, right? P-38, ISB Agent, Ruthless Raider, and we're going to get a bunch of new ones. So what is your plan for just potentially giving up your turn 1 play to a Ping Tarkin Town? Next tension point, triple Dark Raid. We already know in the current cycle how devastating this card can be. This card might be going to the moon in terms of value. There are some crazy new cards coming out that slot very cleanly into the Jango deck. This card is going to essentially never whiff on finding a unit that pings and taps with Jango's ability, potentially even finding units that can tap multiple units all at once. We'll cover those in a moment. What are you doing about this? What are you doing about the exhaust effects in general? Can you race? This also just has built-in answers to piloting and upgrade heavy synergies, because with a tiny little card play, ISB Agent, P-38, whatever, they can nullify an entire turn worth of attacks from your upgraded units, and definitely put you on the back foot and probably win any races if they're able to keep your powerful units from attacking. Jango on the flip, of course, being able to tap multiple units. Well, all of a sudden we're going to find out just how insane that's going to be with the addition of a couple new cards. We haven't seen Jango be able to tap multiple units in one action outside of some special synergies like exploiting with Ruthless Raiders in play or P-38s in play and getting like 2 triggers at once. It's about to be incredibly easy to exhaust an entire board with Jango's ability. Jango not having a restriction to how many times his ability can go off on a unit side might end up becoming incredibly oppressive. So we have to kind of account for this in our testing. How are we beating this? How are we racing this Jango deck? It's certainly something that should be on the forefront of your brain when you are deck building and when you are figuring out if a deck is good, right? Your deck can look great and can beat other brews great, but this one and the Han that we just talked about are going to be real litmus tests on whether or not your deck can actually function in a tournament. How will it improve? So, number one, IG-2000. This card is insane with Jango. A 3/4 space unit for 4 that will deal 1 damage to up to 3 units. Nuts. This can exhaust 3 units on the Jango flip. Of course, it can exhaust 1 before that, just giving you more ways, right? This is like P38 when you don't have the Jango out. When the Jango's out, it's P38 on steroids. Crazy card. What about the War Juggernaut, which actually just got revealed very recently? This unit is a 3/7 for 6. Doesn't seem that great, but when played, deal 1 damage to any number of units, including your own if you wanted to. You can exhaust your opponent's entire board with this card when you have Jango out. And this can get triple dark rated as on Jango's flip turn, or even earlier if needed. And not only that, this card is a 3/7 that gets +1 for each damaged unit. This card can hit for 10 potentially off of a triple dark raid. I think this one definitely replaces something like the tank that was getting played, the heavy persuader tank that was getting played currently. This one's scary. I think both of those cards are pretty scary to look at in terms of Jango. The last one, maybe Devastator. Like, it might be too expensive. The card's very, very powerful, and you can triple dark raid and hit for like 13 to the base if you wanted to. Jango might not even need to go this high into the curve, but it certainly remains an option. And there's a lot of other cards. There's like a new 1-drop that does indirect damage. There's some new events that you might consider, but these are like my main call outs to talk about Jango improving. All right, next up, Sabine and or red-green hero ECL deck. So Sabine is currently the deck that does this. Will it stay the deck that does this? Possibly. I think very possibly it will still be the best shell for this. I'm not 100% sure of that, which is why I'm talking about this more as like a general archetype than just Sabine. But at least when it comes to Sabine, will grounds be king? Like, your opponents are all in space. Can you just outrace them on the ground? In many cases, yes, because of Darksaber and just the fact that Sabine is a 4-flip leader. How do you manage that? Like, when you are brewing decks, how are you managing the speed of this deck and primarily the main tension points that Sabine presents, which are things like Darksaber or Wing Leader buffing her, and then the ECL power plays of Poe and Wrecker, which are, you know, two of the most powerful plays that can be made in one action, right? ECL Poe Wrecker will probably exist no matter what shell we end up playing in red-green, because it's just crazy. It's crazy to give those units ambush. Poe, interestingly enough, has built-in upgrade destruction with his ECL, which seems to be an important thing in this set with a bunch of upgrades all around. They can one-shot basically any leader on the ground. Now, they can't do that to space, which, you know, maybe if you are able to race a Sabine in space, that might be difficult for her to manage, because honestly, the space that she provides, especially if she wants to still be playing the bulky ground units, is just going to be outclassed by a lot of leaders that benefit space more. Things like Poe and Wedge, and maybe even like the villain stuff, right? Of course, Jango, Vader, Luke, pilot leaders, right? Like, they're going to have more synergies in space than you. But this deck is still asking some very simple questions, and if you can't answer them, again, I think your deck might need some tweaking, right? And those, like I mentioned, the buffs on the turn 3 leader is a very important thing to be considering, and then the power plays of ECL, Poe, and Wrecker. Will it improve? Yes. I mean, Chewbacca's nuts. Chewbacca is a very dangerous card to exist, in my opinion. I think having an upgrade that basically turns your units into giant lurking TIE Phantoms is dangerous. Now, of course, lurking TIE Phantom also prevents damage, but, you know, giving +3/+3 also, in a sense, prevents damage, because it's very difficult to use damage-based removal on a unit that has 6, 7, 8 health. It can still get attacked into, but it's going to be massive. It can't get bounced. It can't get removed by blue removal or whatever it might be. Chewbacca is scary, and there's going to be a lot of games that are simply lost on turn 2 when your opponent goes turn 1, 2 drop space unit, turn 2 Chewbacca, and you will lose a lot of games to that. And I don't love it. I don't really like that kind of brute force anti-interaction. I do like aggressive decks, but Lurking TIE Phantom was another card that feels a little brute force in terms of its anti-interaction. But this is actually like worlds more scary because Lurking TIE Phantom dies to basically any space unit. So it's a little easier in that sense to say, okay, I can't do damage removal on it, but at least I can like fight it with units, and most decks have units. And then there's even like shrinking effects like Perilous Position and Make an Opening, which were very clean answers. There's not going to be a lot of clean answers to this outside of Upgrade Hate, and Upgrade Hate might just need to be everywhere all the time with a card like this floating around. Chewie is very scary. Another cool potential upgrade will be Luke Skywalker, which is not quite Chewie levels of power, but of course, once you buff the unit, they have to kill it, and then bam, Luke jumps to the ground, and you have a 3/2 on the ground. I think both of these cards are going to be pretty powerful in some red and green hero shells. Well, we'll also call out Poe Dameron because maybe he's just the better red-green ECL leader. He not going to do like a deck tech on him right now, but he also has some very powerful plays, and he will be more space dominant because, of course, his ability requires space units. And we do have some new space units like the Phoenix Squadron A-Wings, like Battlefield, Marine, and Space, Textless 3/2, and then Blue Leader, just a very good split card unit. I think all of this can provide benefits to the Sabine archetype or the red-green ECL archetype. All right, next we're going to cover a few like general things. So this is Cunning, the color, not the card. Cunning is great, and Cunning might even be better going forward because Cunning has built in, like we talked about with the Han, built-in answers to kind of everything. Balance being a very generically powerful effect, especially against upgrades, but also just great at tempo, and this is a very tempo-oriented game. Yellow's space is already in a great spot and is getting some more help there, and especially with Han being able to play things like turn 1 Falcons, it's very powerful. I think Bamboozle, the power level of this card is going through the roof with the fact that this can kill pilot leaders for 0, including the Luke leader, which says he can't be destroyed by upgrade removal. That's very powerful, like 0 cost kill a leader and exhaust the unit that it piloted onto. Like, are you going to be able to flip a pilot leader onto a unit when you're playing against a yellow deck? That seems potentially problematic, right? And then they just have powerful disruption, right? The best discard effects. And we have Spark of Rebellion, but there's a new one that costs 1 that only hits events, but that's wildly powerful too. They have good exhausting effects. No Good to Me Dead. Cunning, right? Bamboozle. Just ways to win races, right? Cunning is very good at doing that. And then things like Waylay, Clear the Field, Spare the Target, Cantina Bouncer, right? These are very powerful effects that just keep you ahead. And when you are building decks right now, I would very much recommend you think about how much Cunning strategy as a whole beats you. How much does it race you well? Like, can it race you well just with its tempo effects? And do consider all these cards while you're building, especially things like Bamboozle right now and all the bounce effects. These are very, very detrimental to a lot of new strategies. And then next is removal. So this typically is a blue villain thing because although, or not all, but most of the best new removal is blue villain, and like Power of the Dark Side, its stocks might be going up. Of course, Chewbacca completely bricks it, but all these other things where you're just trying to like play a guy and pilot, like Power of the Dark Side is of course very, very powerful against that. Barrage is a card that still remains incredibly powerful, something to consider. We're getting a couple new removals like Direct Hit, defeat a non-leader vehicle unit, No Glory, Only Results, which is basically a Vanquish, but that is just good against things like Ruthless Raider and K2 because you get to steal the unit first. It also will be good against things like Lurking TIE Phantom and Chewbacca because they become friendly units when you steal them. 5 cost, it might be too late. You might have already taken like 12 damage from the Chewbacca unit, but it's certainly something that's going to elevate the overall power level of removal in the game. And if you were trying to build a removal based strategy, these are all powerful effects to be considering. It's a little concerning right now. I think the speed of this format is faster actually, or potentially faster than the previous set. The early drop units have just gotten better. This pilot stuff has elevated the speed of the game as well. The decks that have already been good were already fast. So we are potentially too slow when trying to do this. And, you know, a card that I will talk about later, but I might as well talk about now. Don't remember the card, but it's a new card that was just revealed. It's a 1-cost Cunning event. It says you discard an event from your opponent's hand. You look at their hand and discard a card. That's going to be very powerful against removal-based strategies, event-based strategies. It's so much better than Spark of Rebellion into those decks. It costing 1 is actually crazy. And of course, doesn't mean they can't also play Spark of Rebellion. So I think these kind of strategies are potentially getting a little weaker right now. All right, so let's just summarize the tension points. So DJ is like the first tension point when it comes to like powerful interaction you should be thinking about in deck building. Other things are like the turn 1 Falcon or other like 3-drop like Blue Leader like out of Han. Like these are very important things. Like I don't want my deck to entirely fall apart if my turn 1 space unit is dead to like a Falcon or something. Like we have to have some other way to maneuver that kind of strategy. Think about bounce or upgrade hate, right? You can't be so all in that you just lose to Waylay or lose to Disabling Fangfighter or Bamboozle, whatever it may be. These are cards that you need to be considering. Then the Sabine / red green ECL thing, right? Like whether or not Sabine or not, Poe ECL, Wrecker ECL. What's happening when that hits the table? Are you fast enough to get under that? Potentially. There's a lot of speed in this format. And then the other thing would be like, what do you do about like an upgraded early unit, right? An early leader specifically, like Sabine with a Darksaber. But even the new Kaz leader, the 4-drop pilot, right? Like he's an upgrade. He's an early leader upgrade. So you're getting like really early power plays presented to you, and how are you dealing with that? Next tension point, ping Tarkin Town, wherever shell that may be. How do you maneuver that in your deck building? And then can you deal with the exhausting effects and how exhausting it's going to be to get your entire board exhausted over and over and over again by the new Jango staples? And lastly is TDR. How pushed is this card going to get? How wild are things going to happen on turn 4, 5, 6, or turn 3, 4, 5, 6 when they TDR and just like have an army of things to pick from? That it's not just like Ruthless Raider or then everything else is like substantially worse. Now it's like Ruthless Raider, but also you have like 4 other things potentially that can do devastating things to your board. All right, now I want to do a bit of this is like a theory of like how to potentially start your testing, right? And I do this a lot in my own building, but number 1, of course, is to build or iterate on a deck. You have an idea, you get something down, right? And then you start playing with it. Now, initial games, I don't think it matters too much if you're playing specifically against meta stuff, but you need to at least feel the deck out. Like, does it curve right? Are you presenting powerful plays, right? Regardless of what you're doing, you just need to like run it a little bit just to like feel it out. But past that, now it's time to start asking these questions, right? Can you beat DJ on turn 4 or potentially turn 3 through a tech? If no, back to step 1, right? Do you lose to a turn 1 Falcon? Does your deck just fall apart if that happens? If yes, we might need to reevaluate, right? What happens with ping Tarkin Town against your build? Like, if it's, do you have to always jam into that and then your opponent just ISBs and kills it, or even Quinlan or whatever it is? Are you so far behind? Like, can you maneuver through a ping Tarkin Town? Can you answer a turn 3 Darksaber? Or forget just Darksaber, Wing Leader, or even the new Kaz leader if he's piloted onto something, right? These are giant leaders, right? Essentially, you're getting a turn 3 leader that becomes enormous. Can you deal with that? Because removal doesn't hit leaders, bounce doesn't hit leaders, right? But Bamboozle does hit pilot leaders, so that might be an answer there, or some upgrade hate if it's a pilot specific thing. But can you deal with that? This isn't a question that's been asked for months now, right? This is not a new thing. This is almost 8 months worth of dealing with a Darksaber Sabine. So can you deal with that? Can you deal with ECO Poe Wrecker? Same question, right? This has also been 8 months, right? This should be embedded in deck building by now. Like, how do we manage this Sabine, or if it's a Poe deck, whatever it may be. We vet against Han. That's the first thing, right? We get real reps into this deck. We vet against Jango and Sabine, or Jango and Red Green ECL. That's probably the next. And Jango might be above Han at some point because we're seeing so much help that deck gets. But these are kind of the three main pillars right now before we discover new ones, right? Can't tell you what the new pillars are. Maybe it'll be Piet. Maybe it'll be Thrawn. Maybe it won't be anyone. But can't know yet. But when we're trying to find new pillars, we have to make sure our new pillar can beat the old pillars. And these are the old ones. Then we return to step one, right? If this isn't working, if we're not vetting correctly against these decks, we're not beating them, we have to probably build and iterate and keep going. After all that, that's when you start really grinding into other archetypes, or creating your own gauntlets, especially with a new set where you don't have data and you don't know what's good. You have to actually discover what's good. And of course, it helps if you have other people to test with, right? Teammates or other people that you know that you can play with, who you trust to make powerful decks, right? So you kind of accumulate like a base of like what you think might be good. Okay, we know Han, Jango, Sabine are good, but we've discovered that this Thrawn red deck is powerful, or this Piet red deck is powerful. Let's add those into our archetype testing and see how things function into those decks as well. Maybe it'll be Trench. Maybe it'll be the last leader that we haven't had revealed yet. Whatever it may be, you definitely will need to start incorporating that testing as well in order to like truly vet something. All right, so from here on out, we're going to talk some more jump to Lightspeed specific. So early insight I have for you. So space focused. Of course, this is a space focused deck. We have tons of new space units, a lot of very powerful ones. But how much is too much? Can you play a full space deck, or is that not going to cut it against things like Han or Jango or whatever else it may be? Do you need to still present ground threats? How much can you just abandon the ground entirely? Next up, upgrade. It's an upgrade heavy set. Should we be main decking upgrade removal? I think currently I would say probably yes. In yellow, I'd probably be main decking Bamboozles right now, but in general, I think you also need to consider the fact that other people will be playing upgrade hate against your stuff. How much can you all in on this pilot stuff or other upgrades? Then we start looking at synergy-based strategy. So there are some new leaders that are very synergy-focused. We'll talk about that in just a second, but it's a little different than like just archetype specific, right? These are like build-around leaders. We've seen this before, but right now it would be something like, a good example would be something like Thrawn, right? It's a pure build-around leader. It's more difficult to vet something like that because it's harder to sometimes understand how that whole deck will function until you play a ton of games. It's not as easy as just like, okay, this is this is a wedge deck. I play space units and I play pilots, and we kind of see how fast we can go. And if we need to add interaction, right, it's not so much as synergy focused as something like Thrawn, where it's a little more difficult to evaluate its like place. Next, what does the new aggro look like? How much quicker is the format? I think it might be a turn quicker, at least early, seeing some of the new power plays that can come out. So format fast might mean that some of the later leaders are kind of dead on arrival. And then after that, we'll do some, coming up, we're going to do some leader and card call outs. So here are some of the new synergy based leaders, and Kazuda might not exactly fit here because yes, he's synergy based in the sense that you kind of want to build around his effect of removing negative effects. But honestly, outside of a few cards like Falcon and like maybe the stolen AT hauler or bounty units, and of course the two new units that he was given, you don't need to like fill his whole deck with synergy. He's just going to be an aggro leader, and he presents very massive stats as a 4-drop, right? He's either got Sabine stats or he can hop onto a vehicle and give +3/+3, which is kind of crazy to do that early. But Thrawn is very much a synergy leader, right? We got to search through all the when defeateds. We have to figure out what color this might work with. We have to see like how does he interact with these other pillars, utilizing these when defeated effects. There's a lot of work to do with him. Piet, right? That's another just capital ship build around. Piet's kind of on rails. I don't think it's going to be too difficult to figure out what's working or not with him. You just kind of want to ramp and you want to play a big thing every turn. Not super interesting to me overall, but like certainly a thing that seems quite powerful to do. It's a ton of resource cheating with him, and no, resource cheating is good. Phasma is a build around, right? I think the odd Han Solo stuff is a synergy based leader. The indirect damage call out on Boba Fett, right? Indirect damage has felt not great, but like Boba Fett for me definitely elevates that and might get you to that critical mass of indirect damage that actually makes it powerful. And then we have space focused leaders. So these are ones that I would caution when building early, not get so overwhelmed with just like jamming every single space unit, every single pilot into them, because I think you might find that you lose to too much ground-based strategies, especially like Han, or you got too hard by things like Falcon, or just losing your early play that you were all in on. But all these leaders have definite power to them. I think Poe might end up functioning in a very similar way that Sabine currently does. Wedge, resource cheating, we know that's good. Darth Vader, free units, one of the first leader that can give you free units, right? Rex made you pay 2 for his token units, and Vader can do that on his own. And Luke, interestingly enough, is the only pilot leader in the game so far that has the cannot be defeated by upgrade hate. Now he still can get defeated by bamboozle, but at least he's protected from things like disabling Fang Fighter and such. So definite some power there. And lastly, just some card call outs. Now this is not about power level specifically. It's just some things that I think are interesting. I got 2 pages of this, but like something like R2, I think is going to end up potentially being a very important card because of free and because it breaks math in your favor a lot of the time. Ahsoka looks like a very powerful force enabling unit that works well into other discard strategies that yellow and red already provide. You're All Clear Kid, I think, is a very cool removal. I don't know if it'll end up being good enough because it says 3 or less remaining health, and a lot of space units that you're going to want to kill will have more than that. So while I think its rate is very good, it might not end up fitting well enough into strategies, especially when people are upgrading their units. Cham Syndulla, red ramp's cool. Might be worth looking at, especially as like a sideboard strategy. I think Krennic is a very powerful card in quite a few archetypes. He's going to be kind of a glue in Thrawn. I think he's going to be very powerful in something like Gar Saxon, but even other decks that don't like specifically build entirely around like shielded or upgrades, or even the when defeated, could utilize a 2/2 shielded unit that like might make a couple cards cheaper in their deck. So he seems quite good. Kajimi Patrollers, this is like kind of looks like a Vader staple to me, just like getting you started, getting 2 units into play. Fight with fire. 1 cost deal 3 is cool. I think, of course, dealing 3 to 1 of your own isn't always cool, but there's some interesting things you can do with that. There's like you can play like 6 1/4 grit units these days. I just think this card's interesting. I'm not sure it'll be great, but I just kind of wanted to mention it. Resupply Carrier. This looks like a glue card for the Piet strategy, but potentially into other big ramp decks. I think this card could be powerful. And then just a few more. So Colossus is kind of my placeholder here for all the new bases. 35 health is a ton. I'd be looking at playing this with something like a Palpatine deck, although I'm very worried that 35 health is not even enough for an innate drop leader with the speed of the format. But Colossus looks interesting, and Victor Leader is just a very powerful card. It was a card I previewed, another glue card for a Vader strategy, but could potentially fit into some other space based villain decks. Jan Communications is the card I mentioned before, the 1 cost Cunning Heroism event that says look at your opponent's hand, discard an event from it. Man, Control's in trouble, I think, with a card like this existing. Control was already teetering on kind of being in a messy situation because of how good Mono Yellow Han is into it, but this is just wild, a 1 cost effect like this to exist in conjunction with all the other discard. And like, you know, you got Bodhi, you got Spark of Rebellion, you got Kira, you got Cunning, you got so much. And then if you're playing red, forget about it, you got 1,000 more. So this card is definitely something. And a few more to go is the Stolen AT Hauler is a new legendary, very overstated 3-drop. I think with the new Kaz leader, being able to turn off this negative effect is powerful, but of course you can play this in conjunction with bounce effects or even capture effects. Just get it back after your opponent plays it. And you know, it's just so much stats. It's Underworld too, which Cad Bane might like. Fireball. Wow, this card is nuts, especially with the Kaz leader. 2 cost 3/3 ambush with no downside if you play it with him. I don't think in most other decks I'd be playing this, although maybe you consider this in something like a Boba Hero deck where this could ambush for 4 as early as turn 1. But for the most part, this, other than that, I'm not sure it's going to be good enough because, of course, it will kill itself over a few turns. So, yeah, Kaz, though, wow, that card is crazy with him. And then lastly, Trench Run. Talk about increasing the speed of a format. A 1-cost 4 damage pump is wild. There is the downside of your opponent potentially blowing up the unit. I don't think most of the time your unit will die, especially if you're using it on a unit that has a decent amount of health, especially like a piloted unit. It's going to be hard for the difference of the cards to be like 5+ most of the time, although it is certainly possible. But yeah, there's a lot of new pumps. This one is probably the scariest of the bunch just because 1 for 4 power is a ton. It only works on fighters, but Red Hero has a lot of fighters, and this card packs a punch. All right. I hope this helps get you kickstarted in your set 4 testing. I'm pretty excited about it. I think the power level of the set is pretty high, especially coming off of the Twilight of the Republic set. Jump to Lightspeed looks much more powerful. There's a lot of cool leaders. Like I already called out 10 of them. There's cool build around leaders. There's cool just like we're powerful aggro leaders, right? There's a lot of stuff to do with the set. I think a lot of things will potentially change, but I also want to caution not going so far away from what you know is already good, because I think you need to make sure that you're surviving into the current pillars, because I can't imagine go away. All right, that's what I got. Let me know what you think in the comments, and until next time, take care.